Welcome to the Inconceivably Connected podcast. I'm your host and fellow donor-conceived person, Nick Ludwig. For this week's episode, I spoke with a woman named Tiana from the state of Maryland. Her story has many aspects that we've yet to cross into on the show so far. One of the most unique being the way she went about meeting her donor for the first time. I won't give away how that played out, but it's an idea I've heard from other DCPs before and had yet to come across anyone's reality actually playing out this way. Additionally, Tiana's journey raises the idea of isolation in a few key ways, and how being donor-conceived can sometimes make us feel separate or apart. But Tiana's experience being a DCP is not defined by that, in my estimation. Quite the opposite, actually, as she did her dissertation on the DCP experience by interviewing over 100 mental health therapists on the subject matter, and has become a vocal advocate for change in the fertility industry on the international stage. A great way to use her experience as fuel for good, if you ask me. There are more educational bits in this one that I'm thankful to Tiana for sharing. I'm learning just as much as anyone through these conversations, and I'm excited for Tiana's knowledge and wisdom to be shared with you all now, too.
My name is Tiana. I'm here with my dog, talking to Nick, and we're trying to get a story out, trying to get this story that's happened in my life, and it's happened to so many of us, this donor-conceived reality that we live with. And I'm just very happy to be here. Very happy to have found Nick, who's importantly putting this work out there. I've done some advocacy on behalf of donor-conceived people in the international space, and I think it's really important work. So this part of my life, this middle part of my life, I'm living in Maryland, and I was from the Boston area, and most of my family is from the Boston area as well. And in the late 70s, when they were trying to figure out what they were doing in donor conception, they were right on the edge of fresh sperm donation in the artificial insemination world, and that was kind of coincided with the years that I was conceived. And what was happening for my bio dad was he was up at Harvard doing his med school degree, and he was approached by a professor that he liked, who he wanted to work with. And this is how I heard it after the fact from him. And I think the Hillel, which was the Jewish student association, might have all gotten an invitation. I'm not sure, but I'm thinking that happened. And basically, he said, yeah, he would help a family to conceive, and he was interested, as I said, in working with the professor. His name was Dr. Goldstein, up at Harvard, and he donated his sperm, and he knew he was helping a family. He was told that. He asked a couple times, to my surprise, he told me he asked a couple times if there was a live birth from the donation. So he did know I existed, I suppose. He didn't know about anybody else. He was a man who was a bisexual man, so he was in a relationship with a man at the time, so he didn't have children, and so this was pretty much his one go at it, and thought it was pretty cool, I think, and I'm not sure if he still thinks it's pretty cool, but he definitely did at one point. You know, he was an entrepreneur at Harvard, and he was writing papers for a lot of more wealthy colleagues of his there, and he was coming from Brooklyn as a poor kid, and he was just doing what he needed to do to make a buck, and this was one thing. And I think there were some altruistic motives at the beginning as well for him. then let's see. So that's what I know of him from meeting him, which I found him. That was a whole journey in and of itself. So I met him when I was in my early 40s and had 2 young kids. And the process of meeting him was really intense because I called him a bunch of times. He didn't return my call. He called me once and he hung up on me a couple of times. It was just really intense. And then one day I said to my husband, let's just drive up to Greenwich Village. That's where he lives, right in the village. And so we did. And my husband knocked on his door as a delivery person, and he came to the door, and I gave him a letter, and I asked him if he would meet me around the corner for a meeting, and he came. I mean, I knew very well that it was possible he wasn't going to come, but he showed up with his dog, and we spent all day just kibitzing there, and it was a good meeting. He met my whole family on that first day. We all kind of just met that day at the same time. And I was grateful for that experience. I was grateful that got to meet him, because for a good decade, I was just really wanted to know. And I wanted my medical history, which was even more important for me. And that has proved very important that I found him and that I do have my medical history now. Being celiac, which is a genetic disease, I first got clued into, way late in life, because he was celiac and because he ate bananas on this crazy diet as a kid. And, it was definitely something that I needed to know now that my boys are getting diagnosed now. And it's very important for us, because it leads to a lot of damage, intestinal damage, and can have serious ramifications if not dealt with. So I think I followed my gut on that, and I found him, and that was really a driving force in it.
So that was an unannounced visit.
It was unannounced.
I've often heard other donor-conceived people almost fantasize about just knocking on the door blindly and hoping for the best, and you actually did it. I did. That's pretty gutsy, but I like it.
Yeah.
What were you feeling in that moment when your husband went to the door? Were you expecting him to respond positively to it, or?
Yeah, I was with my family, so I was like, either way, we're going to have a good day. We're going to go to Ellis Island, and we're going to do other stuff. So I was just like, we'll see if this works, because we had been, in this weird place where I had written letters and he wasn't responding. And then, like I said, I got these calls and then hang-ups, and I knew it was from him. And so it's just like, I kind of felt like I just had to just do it. And just go for it. And so that's what I did. I think I had, when he came to the restaurant, I had a flower in my hand, and I gave him a flower. I think that made it nicer for that first meeting, and to thank him for showing up. And I was pretty happy with that. It didn't go that smoothly all along, right? So that was about 8 years ago now, and we are not in relationship any longer.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in that meeting, so your family is with you, your husband and your 2 children. That creates an interesting dynamic, I think, where, individually you may want to ask certain questions, but amongst the group, it may be a different kind of experience. So could you elaborate a little bit more on how that went as a family? Because your kids are connected to him as well.
Yeah, so what we did was when he came in, we went to a separate room by ourselves, and we talked for a good couple hours, just me and him.
Okay.
And then when I think we both felt comfortable at that point, then I introduced him to the family.
Okay.
But
Got it.
yeah. He saw them at the beginning too. But yeah.
He did. So he got the full picture up front, and then you guys dug a little deeper afterwards. That makes sense. Got it. So let's backtrack a little bit. I'm interested to hear more about your discovery process and how all of this originally came to light for you.
Mm-hmm. So as I said, I'm a bit older than the average DC who's probably out there these days. And we are, there's DCPs of all ages, but when I was looking, there was a couple of resources, one called the PCVIA Yahoo group, where we started with a bunch of us kind of started with Bill Cordray, who was running that, and Bill was the first one who really needs to get credit for being the first real advocate for DCPs. So for about 10 years, he ran this Yahoo group. I probably came in on one of his very last years, and he would try to explain it to people and do all kinds of helpful things from a helpful angle, and tell cautionary tales to us about all kinds of things. So he was really, when there was no organization or there was no, he was the main resource for so many. And I really want to honor him for that, because he put a lot of time and effort into it. And so he had advised me to, find the yearbooks. So at the time, I knew that with the I had a very complicated case because I had Ashkenazi Jewish DNA. So there was a whole endogamous situation, which made it a little bit more complicated to get so I had to learn all the science behind it. And then I basically just cross-referenced my DNA cousins with the Harvard Med School yearbooks. And it was clear as day there for a while, with the last name, which was a more unique Jewish last name. So it was a little easier. And just built out that tree from, I think I had a third cousin. It wasn't that easy because I had to build out from a third cousin and then work backwards. But
okay.
Yeah.
And let me pull back even further. So what prompted you to look into all of this? Did you always know that you were donor conceived, or did something just make you investigate a little bit further into your DNA?
So again, I have not a run-of-the-mill, did the DNA test kind of story. I had a story where my mom told me, believe it or not, and she was going in for a surgery I was in my mid-20s. I think I was 24. I was home from college, just had this incredibly awful breakup, and she was going in for a surgery, and she's like, and by the way, your biological father's not your father. And I was like, well, that explains a lot. I can't say I was terribly shocked. She's like, I'm going to light a candle. I'm going to tell you something. Now, my dad who raised me was in the next room, and she's like, just be really quiet because he can't know, because he'll kill me if he knows. And she meant it. She really was scared. And, but she was afraid that she wasn't going to be able to tell me, and something might happen with the surgery. And I will say a lot of things kind of went awry in my family, and the decisions she made, one of which was raising me out of the country, was probably caused by a lot of the donor conceived dynamics in my family, and trying to keep me from my social dad's family, my dad who raised me's family. So I kind of thought there was possibly something on there. There was a lot of times where my mom would, when I was growing up overseas, she would say something like, oh, there's that adoption story, and at some point we have to sit down and we have to talk, and it was always kind of this very mysterious thing. So I don't think I was totally caught off guard, but in some ways I was too, because I have a journal entry that I wrote the next day, and I was definitely like, whoa. I mean,
Right.
besides being, this explains a lot, it was a little earth shattering. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was kind of going into my next question, is in that moment of this truth being revealed to you, what were your earliest feelings around it? Obviously it shakes you, but some people, I think the first feeling is something like, relief. But then there's other people where it is, it's traumatic. Sounds like yours was a bit of relief.
Yeah, I was a little relieved, because there was just a lot that didn't make sense. There was a lot that didn't make sense. I had a grandmother. The one thing that really didn't make sense is I had a grandmother, my social dad's mother, who left me out of a will, and who, was particularly not a kind woman. And that was always a mystery. Like, why is she yelling at me for going and seeing these relatives in Italy? Like, I had no idea. But it turns out everybody in my entire family, both sides, knew I was donor conceived, and I didn't. All my cousins knew, all my aunts and uncles. It was like this very open secret that everybody knew except me. And so, yeah, that was, I think that's probably why she wanted me to be raised overseas, and why we stayed so long overseas all through my formative years. And it worked out, kind of worked out. So, yeah.
And how did that make you feel to know that everybody else was aware of where you came from and not you? Because I've had other guests where it was a similar situation.
It was pretty devastating. Yeah, it was very devastating. And I think it has rooted a lot of trust problems. I'm not going to be able to say that in any other way. It is definitely, when somebody pulls the rug from under you at 24, you're kind of like, what? That's a lot to process.
Right. And were you given any sort of explanation as to why everyone else knew and not you? Or okay, no explanation.
No, I mean, I think I knew the explanation. They were a very catty Italian American family. There wasn't really a lot of secrets anywhere. So I think I didn't have to ask, because I just knew they were all in each other's business.
Got it. Okay. And when your mom initially shared this information with you, and I guess requested not to share it with your dad, has that continued to this day, or did you ever have conversations with your dad about this?
Yeah. My dad is a super sweet guy, and he was a very generous soul. I've since lost both my parents, so it's tough. The first 2 years was really rough. I remember going on a walk with him, and he didn't want to confront it with me at all. And so he didn't want to deal with it. And honestly, he was lied to as well. And he was really, I think how I knew that there was a major disconnect is he wasn't, he was educated through high school. He was smart in a lot of ways, where he was good at engineering and things like that. But in the emotional intelligence arena, it wasn't always an easy area to discuss with him. And I knew that we didn't share some similarities in that regard, and some other ones too. But I mean, in terms of like looking alike and things like that, my dad was also an Italian American, as my mom was. So it wasn't like it couldn't have been possible that it was him. There wasn't another culture or identity that I was really dealing with there. Except I didn't know that I had the Ashkenazi Jewish biological father. Yeah, so we had a disconnect for a couple of years, but then I was always a daddy's girl, so it was not really a question that I was going to remain one, and he was very generous. And we were going to see Tuesday with Morrie, which was a play one night, and we went to the play, and it was about a man who raised two children who were not his biological children. And it was his way. After the play, he's like, oh, I had this experience with you, and I totally related to this. And it actually was super healing that we had in it. We didn't plan it. I didn't know that that was going to be in it. It just kind of happened. And we were able to talk about it for the first time, maybe about 5 or 6 years after it happened. Okay. And in that time, I was just like, who is this guy? And I would have these little mini identity crises when I looked in the mirror. And, like, who is half of my genetics? And I knew there was a big story there, I think. And I just wanted to know, especially for the medical side of it.
Right. And now, when you started investigating into the donor, I know from what you shared with me originally that you said you do not have any half siblings that have popped up, no. Which I think is pretty unique for donor conceived people.
It is.
Do you have any feelings around that and the fact that maybe your donor only donated the one time?
Yeah, so that's exactly what happened, because I asked him, I'm like, did you donate? He's like, I donated for a month. And so that's exactly what happened. He just didn't donate very long. He was in a relationship after that with a woman, and they were thinking about having a whole family. So he decided not to do any more donations, I think. And so it was a very short time that he donated. Being an only child and growing up overseas, it's been a little isolating. And so I always wanted to have a sibling. And so when I found out I was donor conceived, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. It'll be the silver lining. I'll meet all these people. And none of that has happened. I mean, there may be one out there. I'm still holding out hope, but it's been an awful long time now. So I have to accept that it's maybe not going to happen.
Okay, got it. And then in terms of, like, when you think about nature versus nurture, and now you've gotten the opportunity to have met your donor, what kind of things did you see in him that maybe filled in some of the blanks that you may have had growing up, where maybe you're a certain way and you didn't realize where it came from, but all of a sudden now you have answers?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about maybe what you uncovered in that regard?
Definitely. I will say, I am a believer in epigenetics. I am a believer because it's science, basically, and I'm a believer in ancestral resilience as well as ancestral trauma. And I think that I knew there was a deep story here. I knew it. I just intrinsically knew it. So I also found out I was colorblind, which I knew I was colorblind, but it was always like, well, why am I the only female colorblind, not colorblind in the absolute way, but like red-green deficient kind of bit. And I was like, this is not common for females. So there's something going on with my genes too, that I knew there was, pieces that needed filling. And then, as I said, there was this gap of intellectualism, I think, with my social father and I, and how I processed spirituality, which I also feel is tapped into a lot of my biological father's family. They were very spiritually oriented, as he was not really he and his extended family, but throughout the generations, they had been part of the Hasidic movement and moving to a founding Lubavitcher shtetl, or a small village, because they believed in this whole asceticism and very spiritual, mystical life. And I think that's kind of come through. I think I'm getting a little weird, but that was something I just intrinsically knew as well.
And then with the donor, now I assume you have this information. The donor, does he have siblings? Is his extended family aware of your existence? And has there been any connection there, or is it limited to just you and the donor?
So I will tell you that the donor and I, so nobody really likes the donor very much in his family. And he was first excommunicated basically from his family for being bisexual, which is tragic for him, really sad. And getting into the Timothy Leary crowd at Harvard. I mean, he has a very interesting history. But his brothers are not close with him, and his brothers do not like him. He has 3 brothers. And when they heard I existed from me to one of their children, their response was, contact us when he's dead.
Wow.
Yeah. So they couldn't even cross the threshold because they really don't like their brother very much. And that was really hard. I think there's this additional component in this family that I just really, it's been a journey. There's people who are very religious, people who are not very religious. So there's a lot of shades of gray.
And in terms of your needs, do you feel like the donor has been available to kind of meet those needs based on the information you might want, or whatever it may be? Do you feel like you've gotten, the key components?
I was lucky. I mean, in the sense that I had 3 years of in relationship with him. He came to my Jewish conversion, which I think I may have actually got to even without knowledge of it. I was always a seeker, and I was like, so, but I did become a Jew by choice. I'm sure it helped that I had this new understanding from him, but I would probably have left Catholicism in any regard, whether it was yogic philosophy or Buddhism or something. And it did fit the bill, and it has provided a wonderful place for my family to be raised in. And it was a tremendous gift, the Ashkenazi Jewish background. So I see it that way.
And that conversion was shaped by your discovery, or is there another timeline where you could see that this was part of your roadmap?
I found when I had a 1-year-old, I found out that I was Jewish, but this is before I had met him. And I just had started, I knew he was Jewish because it's a pretty, it's a very clear marker in the DNA, right? So I knew he was 100% Jewish. And my mom actually had a lot of crypto-Jewish stuff going on. So it was like my DNA would show up very Jewish, and I was just like, this is very interesting. So I put my kid in a Jewish preschool just because I was like, well, we'll both learn, and I'll learn alongside him. And that's what's happened, that now I have 2 Jews that I raised, and we had a beautiful bar mitzvah last year for one of them, and it's just been a great thing for my family, but not easy. Like, my Italian family has not been easy with this, and there was a lot of things that were said and done that it was hard.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my next questions, is how, since all of this is out in the open now, how have your relationships with your extended family, how has that changed? Is there relief amongst them because now you're in on the one big thing that they all knew this entire time? Or
Well, yeah, maybe they didn't know who he was, so it was this big, topic of conversation. And then it was like, oh, okay, so she's Jewish, and I'm sure it answered things for them, I guess. But it's my mom was a Judeophile, so she at one point lived in Jerusalem with nuns, and so it's kind of like she picked a Jewish donor. One of her friends confirmed that to me when she was picking. She actually asked for one, so that's what she got.
so Judaism has been in the air even
in
the earliest days of all this.
All of her friends are Jewish too, it made it a little easier because I was going to Seder's as a kid and things like that, and I've been tight with these people ever since, where I was raised overseas. So.
That's so funny because I also discovered I'm half Ashkenazi Jewish and had never known. And then when I was doing the rewind of my life, I was like, wait a minute, I've been to more bar mitzvahs than anyone in my family by a long shot.
Oh my God.
And some of my closest friends are Jewish.
And I have some, right. And I could probably riff with you on this for quite a bit, because what I would ask you is like, what were those things that happened to you that you could then connect after the fact with being Jewish? For me, it was like, I'm sitting in the middle of the Marshall Islands as a 17-year-old on a beach, and this Palestinian kid shows up and like insisting he teaches me Arabic. So I start learning Arabic at 17, and I did a degree in Middle East studies. I took myself to Cairo for a Fulbright, and I went to Tunisia. No, the Fulbright was in Tunisia, and I was in Cairo learning Arabic for a year, and I was always gravitating towards the Middle East and learning, but there was really no real reason why that should be. So I feel pretty strongly that there's a lot of metaphysics going on.
I think so too. And even looking back on times, I lived in New York City for about 11 years. And anytime I'd be walking with friends, usually through like Columbus Circle, there's a lot of Hasidic Jews that will hang out there and approach people to ask them to pray with them. And they always approached me to ask if I was Jewish. And I was like, what is it about me that is drawing them to me and not everybody else in the group? I don't get it. And now it makes total sense.
I get it. I mean, I also have had so many instances like this, and I've been really fortunate that like I've kind of been able to pick and choose these real gems from his extended family, because I went looking, and I told everybody, oh, this is who I am, and you want to be in a relationship with me, fantastic. And if you don't, you're lost. But I found some real gems. There's 3 second cousins that are outstanding, and one who is an observant Jew from the Lubavitcher community who kept that in the family line. And so it's been great. That part has really been the silver lining of the whole experience.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Are there any personality traits or little quirks that you noticed in the donor that you felt maybe like, oh, I'm seeing a reflection of myself right now, that maybe stand out in particular?
Well, I knew to check myself for ADHD immediately. I knew like all kinds of things that needed to happen. And I just, he's a very complicated person, but I actually just get him, and I just wanted to love him up, but he's really not open to it. And so I had to just accept that loss. I think I didn't necessarily want to be a daughter. I really just wanted to be a friend, but he has a very complicated history and very complicated life, and has been through hell on earth, losing his father young, and then just really raising some of his brothers. And it's just been a very difficult family to get to know. And at this point, I am just trying to stay open and trying to just take care of my family and hope that, someday there will be a reckoning or some type of, just seeing each other again, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think one thing I always like to ask with people who share their story so openly is, and you seem to be pretty at ease with sharing this. For some people, it can be very difficult. Like, they know they want to speak about it, but they don't necessarily know how to. Maybe, this is not part of their daily life, talking openly about this. Is there anything that you could point to in your life, whether it's a daily practice or something you've done mindfully, that has helped you be fully open about this and speak with it in such a comfortable manner?
Yes, I wasn't always like that. I was really afraid for a long time of the stigma of it all. I'm a doctor of public health, and I think I was always looking at it from that lens of public health. You asked what was similar with my bio dad and I. Well, we share a love for medicine and public health, and that was very clear. We are fascinated by the world, and when you look at our bookshelves, we have the same books, same music. It was really crazy. Like, we're both huge Grateful Dead fans. We're both, it was kind of weird on those kind of things. So my advice for people, if they want to relate to this and if they want to live it fully with the full expressions of it in their midst, I would say pair your studying and your projects with it. I did my dissertation on donor conception, the mental health aspects of donor conception, where I interviewed over 100 mental health therapists and tried to figure out, what was needed in the training curriculum for mental health therapists. And all of that made it very comfortable and made it very accessible to me for my mind to process. And it just got easier over the years. Being in the advocacy world, of course, has been great and helpful. I was able to go to Geneva for the first time the Donor Conceive cohort presented to the Convention of the Rights of the Child in 2019 in November. And I spoke there, and that particular group of, I think that we were 30 donor conceived people from all over the world. That was particularly monumental in my understanding and how to relate to what was happening in my life and how to process it. Because it's one thing to understand the U.S. experience of donor conception, but when you really understand the Australian experience and can learn from the Aussies who got such a better grip on things than we do, it really helps.
Got it. And I think you're unique in that you have taken some serious steps towards, communicating with people that are involved in this world and advocating for the rights of donor conceived people. When you think about your findings along the way, what are some of the notable things that you've come across? I mean, it sounds like there's a clear distinction between the way the Aussies and the Americans handle this. But I'm curious, with as much research as you've put into it, what else has popped up that has maybe been eye-catching?
Yeah. So I've been really focused on the medical side of it and people who have had negative externalities from their donor conception based on their medical histories. And I will highlight the story of Narelle Gresh. Let me tell it properly because I don't want to get it wrong on the podcast here. So Narelle, was a groundbreaking Australian donor conceived rights advocate, and she's like spent 13 years trying to access information about her biofather and kin, along with, knowledge of her medical history. And she appealed to the Australian authorities that held her sealed records. And she would say, I believe the truth will set me free, and I am asking for access to my medical records for this reason. And then Narelle was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and was in the last 6 weeks of her life. And the Aussie government finally permitted the information to be shared with her. And she was able to find and meet her bio-dad in those last 6 weeks of life. And she died at nearly 30 years old, learning too late of his genetic predisposition to bowel cancer. And so there's a law now in Australia, and it's called Narelle's Law. And it was instrumental in overturning donor anonymity in her state. And I think that just really stood out, right? I'm like, there are too many people I know in the donor conceived world who don't know what they don't know. And, having had the celiac experience myself, and I know, just navigating a minefield of other types of medical issues myself, it's important, and it's a fundamental human right. It is something guaranteed by the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, and there is no international court or international decree that would not uphold the rights of an accurate identity to a child. So why would they miss for that child their accurate medical history? And I think that is something that is just worth fighting for. We need to use the medical issues that we have as our vehicle to move our rights forward, donor conceived rights forward, because people don't understand it yet. There's a lot of work to do, and I feel like there's so many issues to focus on, but people probably have died from this. Obviously, Narelle has. Narelle has died at age 30 from a cancer she should have been able to circumvent if she had the correct medical knowledge. And I just want to see that all donor conceived individuals have that information. And I call for all governments in the world to guarantee accurate medical histories to people they help facilitate in donor conceptions through their laws. And if they have donor conception in their country, they need to help donor conceived people get their correct medical histories. And, I'm hoping that more work can be done on this, and that we can be a little bit more laser focused, because nobody else should have to die from when preventable information is available, should be available. And it's a rights issue. It's a human rights issue.
I totally agree. And it's nice to see that an entire country like Australia, I should say an entire continent like Australia, has taken steps forward and progressed to a point where there are more rights for people in this community. I'm curious what
I will say some of their states have progressed quicker than others, but as a whole, they're leading the field. Yeah.
Understood. And now I would ask, widening the view to, a worldwide perspective, what's your outlook currently as it stands to the rights of donor conceived people? And, we'll use the U.S. as an example since, we're both from there.
Yeah. So what I would like to see is in 2035, I'd like to see an international donor conceived convention. I wish that the U.S. Association was working on these type of issues. I think it's our best vehicle forward because we seem to be stagnated here in all of the Michigas between all of the various issues and not necessarily moving forward. I also feel like the U.S. community needs to be a democratically elected representative body that that hopefully there could be some type of pro bono arrangement with some of the some of the adoption organizations, and that the adoption organizations do potentially understand us well, and that we could have some pro bono space, and hopefully these lessons learned from around the world will make their way here, and how things were done. Not everywhere has had the successes that the Australians have had. We've seen a couple things with the UK recently that have been promising, and Netherlands has always been a very much a leader in this work. And I really hope that the next generation of donor-conceived people, especially those from so many of these countries that really have yet to have a voice yet. There's so many in Asia we don't hear from yet, and what those countries think and are doing about donor conception. There's so many issues to be dealt with. I hope it can be dealt with on an international level. The commodification of it as an industry is concerning. Things that have happened in war zones in Ukraine, and I've heard too many things that protections need to be upheld, and I think it all starts with these basic rights of a child, and there's just so much work to do. I hope that I can be involved in doing it.
Now, I know you pinpointed people with medical concerns as being maybe the people on the front lines of speaking up on behalf of donor conceived people. What kind of advice would you have for, let's say, donor conceived people who are not affected necessarily by something medical that's been passed down that they deal with? What are other ways that you'd like to see them speak up and move this whole thing forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy for them that they don't have medical issues. I really am. And I want to see them just know that gap of knowledge, it may not affect you, but it may affect your children, and it may affect, a lot of genetic conditions. I know from my public health studies skip a generation. So there are a host of those. So you do need to be aware. You need to be aware what's in your medical history. All donor-conceived people should at least try to get as much information as they can, because you never know when you're going to need it. And how can we help people to find this information? That's what the U.S. Association should do, I think. But I'm just a person in Maryland.
Great. Any other closing thoughts, whether it's connected to what we're currently speaking about, or if there are other bits of interesting information that maybe we left out in the beginning?
I think it can be, when you embrace the journey of donor conception, it can be like this wild roller coaster ride, but as long as you hang on to other DCPs and try to really build that extended family with them, you're on a fun ride, and it has promise, and it has potential to really change the world, and it has potential to change how people see each other. And I think it can also affect other human rights issues. So I think it's an opportunity as well as a challenge. And the more people can embrace it just buckle up and try to enjoy it as best you can, and get that mental health counseling for yourself for the ride.
Cool. All right. Well, I think this would be the point where I would hit the stop button, but we can continue chatting here and see what else pops up.
Okay.
Do you have any questions for me? I guess we'll start there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you got involved in this. I think it's a topic that just needs more exposure. And I guess I want to ask you, how can we get this to more donor-conceived people? Because this, especially internationally, because there's just a lot of people who need to hear this stuff.
I don't think I'm going to give you an answer that is going to, it's not going to be mind-blowing or anything. I think it's a simple answer. I think just talking about it is the most important thing, because there's so many people in the DCP community who struggle with that and hide from it or feel maybe pressure to suppress it. And I don't think that's the answer here. I think to the best of all of our abilities, we need to do whatever we can to openly talk about this, because there's not many other people or types of people that go on this kind of wild journey that donor-conceived people do. I mean, you could look at other groups like people in the LGBTQ community and say there are similarities there, and there are, but I don't know how many people receive this level of shock in their life about the core of who they are.
Right.
I don't know that I can think of anybody. So for the people who have sat well with this discovery and maybe have insights as to why they're able to sit well with it, I think those people need to be the ones that are loudest, to kind of show others who maybe aren't quite ready to speak about it that they have permission to do so too. So that's a little bit of the thinking behind this podcast. Is, someone like you seems very comfortable talking about this, but I also want to hear from people, and I have heard from people who it's like their first time really talking openly.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to experience that.
Well, yeah, you have, it's the truth. Exactly. You have such a huge role to play in stigma, the combating of stigma around this topic. And the one other thing I'm going to say, because I've, skirted global health and international development most of my career as a doctor of public health. And I will say funding is at the root of our problems. We have not been able to capitalize on any type of major funding. And I think that has really hamstrung us. And, we have not been able to develop as a membership group or any type of, I feel like there has been many attempts, but it really needs some sustainable funding. And, people who are talking about it in a very intellectual way, in a way that people can understand and understand the science behind it. We need them to put money up so that we can advance the science of this field and we can understand what needs to be done for our community. We need a champion we need a famous champion or two at this point, to really stand behind, because we're just treading water and not really moving forward as a U.S. donor-conceived community.
Yeah. And I'm hopeful that as the years go on and more people become aware of the donor-conceived community, that things will move in the right direction. But it does feel kind of early stages still. With, the DNA testing companies, they've only been around for a decade or so. And I think I see it in my own extended group of friends, family, and acquaintances. Like, all of those people are now touched by this in some way because they know me. And every donor-conceived person out there has their own circle of people who are now aware. So I still think we're in the awareness stage in some key ways, but as long as we have the technology to uncover this information, it's not going anywhere. So I think it's just a matter of time.
Well, we're in the information age, and with the AI advances we have, at our feet right now, there is no reason why preventable medical histories, if we could just get governments to help to understand this, should be standing in the way of donor conceived people's health and their lives. Because if they have something, they need to be able to navigate it.
I want to give a huge thank you to Tiana for sharing her story with us and for giving us all insights to her learnings along her journey. Ending on a medical note like this always seems appropriate to me, as this is the most pressing issue when thinking about what needs to be changed most quickly in our community. Thankfully, a bit of good news came out of Oregon last week as a bill was passed to ensure DCPs have the right to access information about their genetic origins at 18 years old. I have no doubt that Tiana's voice has given a boost towards things like this happening, so keep speaking up, everybody. If you'd like to keep up with the podcast on social media, you can follow @Inconceivably Connected to stay on top of what's to come here in the future. As always, if you're enjoying these episodes, please consider sharing with others and leaving a 5-star rating and review. Also, if you'd like to know more about my own story, you can find my book online titled Inconceivably Connected, A True Story of Shocking DNA Results and Chasing the Unknown. The music, editing, and production of the Inconceivably Connected podcast were done by myself, Nick Ludwig. And if you're donor conceived and would like to share your own story on the podcast, please fill out the quick form linked in the episode description of any episode. That's all for now. See you again next Monday.